This episode, ripping phone books, bringing structure to outside walls deployment, becoming a compassionate storyteller, and a quick math lesson on the difference between addition and multiplication.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Hello, Derek.
We're getting into math.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan.
Well, you brought it up. I would like to just say, for no apparent reason, that my name is Danielle Hartland, and I am married to Dave Hartland. We have a son. We have a son, Dax. He just turned 7. Just in case you're wondering about me. No particular reason. You?
Yeah, my name's Derek Sanford. I'm married to Kim Sanford for 35 years.
Yeah, it's been
and
a
have
while.
3 kids and a grandchild. And you may not have known.
You're so old.
I know.
But so awesome.
Oh, she's so amazing.
I bet. You're doing the weekly.
Anyway, we're not married.
No, we're not.
You and me.
No, we're not.
Yeah, let's just be crystal clear.
There's been some misconceptions.
We've got some mail.
Yeah. That's misinformed mail.
That's right.
But it was awesome.
Addressed to Derek and Danielle Sanford.
Yeah. My husband loved it. He was like, well, whatever.
All right.
Yeah. So just clear the air. Okay.
Clear the air.
So on to bigger and better things.
Yep.
Megachurch memories. So this is where we're going to focus on what was, what should or shouldn't have been, and what has endured, what we learned from that
from our lovely
model
80s and 90s
Christian upbringing.
trip through the Christian subculture.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about it, my mind goes, and then I forget them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I need to. All right, so you had thought of this one. This is a good one.
Remember this?
The Power Team.
Right, the Power Team.
And other kind of over-the-top evangelistic
events.
things. Yeah. The Power Team, tell me.
So, okay, you remember these guys that were like muscly,
they're like over muscly.
Like you definitely know there were steroids involved.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And oiled up a little bit. Really, the string. Tank tops.
The tank tops, the sweatbands.
With the sweatband. And they would come in, and the whole deal.
They look like Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
And the whole deal was these were like guys that got saved somewhere along the way, and now they're using their muscles for Jesus. So they would rip phone books, they would bend metal bars, they would do all kinds of feats of curiosity.
It was like a freak show. I was on,
and they would preach, at some point and share the gospel.
What was the deal though? It was like God's strength is your strength. Don't do drugs. Sure. Communism is bad. It was stuff like that, wasn't it? Sure. It wasn't like.
I mean, you're remembering more about the message than I do, but
I paid attention.
I just know it was like a come to Jesus message as well.
I was on a Reddit thread, and someone said they went to their church, and the dude couldn't rip the phone book.
Oh, whoops!
So they prayed and started it with a knife, and everyone was cool with it. What? Like God brings the tools, kind of a thing.
God provided the knife.
What?
Yeah, just at the right time.
God, that's right here.
Yeah.
Wow, scissors.
Just like He provided the lamb for Abraham on the mountain.
Oh, what a trip. I remember we
Yeah,
specifically, so we brought in this group. I couldn't think of the name of it before we started recording. This like Christian Chumbawamba group called, I already forgot again.
Worldwide
Message Tribe.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first times we had done like it. So like the Power Team and whatever, that would be like in the church.
Right.
So that one we did at the local high school.
We rented out a venue.
Yeah, we rented out like the auditorium.
Yeah.
And the intermediate high school, like the biggest one in Erie.
Did the big concert.
And we did like a huge, I just remember they had these huge foam hands. I just remember looking. I would have I realized that I was like a programming person before it was ever a thing. Because I would have these moments in these experiences where I would be like, that's a choice. And then I'd be like back into it or whatever, the big hands in the front.
And I, until you mentioned it, had forgot all about the big hands.
Yeah.
But then the song came back to me. We talk to the Lord. We talk to the Lord. So yeah, you can look up.
Everybody hit the mat.
Boom. We talk.
Yeah. Oh man.
So yeah, look up. Spotify Worldwide.
Worldwide Message Tribe. Look it up.
Worldwide Message Tribe.
That'd
We talked
wild
to the Lord. I think was the name of it.
Yeah.
It was quite an event.
It was a lot of jumping.
So are there any redeeming qualities to the Power Team or the concerts or? As I was thinking about this, I'm like, it was definitely like the height of attractional.
Yes.
Like, we got to do something to draw a crowd.
Yeah, we got to get people here,
in the doors,
just so we can talk to them,
to draw a crowd, and then we're gonna get them with the gospel kind of thing.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a bait and switch.
Yeah.
But here's one of the redeeming qualities that I thought of. To me, it got the church thinking about evangelism.
Yeah, that's
thinking
good.
about outside the walls, like who are the people we're trying to reach.
Yeah.
Understanding that we need to bridge that gap somehow, to have conversation with them. And again, some of the methodology that we chose was a little wacky.
Yeah.
But I think the mindset, the impetus is a good thing.
And I think for us, I don't know if this happened with other churches, but I know for us for sure, we had a group of people, Pastor Mike was one of them, you were one of them, who really, these kinds of things helped us, like you're saying, look outside the walls, but we were specifically looking at the culture. Like there were things where like, and maybe we wouldn't do it today to be fair, but like maybe we would take out an ad for an Easter service and we would do something in that ad that was culturally relevant, but it wasn't a bait and switch. It was just like, let's look different than the other ads. Let's not put it with the church ads. Let's put it with the lifestyle stuff, put it with whatever. So we started making like really strategic decisions about how do we get into the culture? How do we speak to the culture? I think that's a enduring thing for good and for bad. But
when you just said newspaper, it made me think of another one that I hadn't thought of. Yeah. We did a Harry Potter book club for teenagers. Do you remember this?
Yes.
And a Harry Potter book club when it was not cool for Christians to be digging Harry Potter.
Yeah, that was risky.
Like, it was risky.
Yep.
And
good one.
By the way, J.K. Rowling's journey has been fascinating.
It has.
But
that's for another podcast. That's for our author podcast.
But
it has.
The newspaper part of it was there was another church wrote a massive article in the newspaper about how demonic we were.
Yeah. That was rough.
For having a Harry Potter a book reading. So there you go. But that was another example.
Yeah,
it
that's
wasn't
great.
the power team. And, our children's pastor wasn't oiled up and ripped, but
he was just walking on eggs. We'll get to that one that's for another story for another day. Okay, so training notes. So this is where we just want to dedicate some time where you can kind of have an overflow from staff trainings you've done, or we've also started taking Q&A from our staff, just so everyone is listening and we can kind of dissect some of this like real-time stuff in another way, like from other people's perspectives. So hopefully this is helpful for those of you listening.
Yeah. And this one actually came from another pastor that I had a chance to visit with a couple of weeks ago. And he had come down, he had heard me at a workshop training kind of thing that he was in, and wanted to talk about outside the walls church multiplication stuff that we're working on. And his church has been doing, they actually started before us. They started at COVID. He basically, when the church shut down in COVID, he said, we made the shift immediately to say, we're not closed, you're deployed.
Oh, genius.
So
genius.
He's just like, hey, we're just leaning into deployment to the point where their staff at their church, they only staff around two things. One is birth to college.
Okay.
So kids and youth essentially. And two, deployment.
Cool.
They have no other staff, internal ministries that they're staffing.
Wow, that's commitment. That's awesome.
So they're committed to it. And he brought a couple of things that I thought was just fascinating. So the question to me was, how do we bring some structure around our outside the walls deployment? This is it's a fairly small church in New York, and so they just kind of like release the hounds, just like go do it.
This is the age-old question of like, wow, cool idea, but what if it works? What's like 2.0?
Exactly.
Which that's great.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And so I learned a lot from our conversation, and kind of went into the conversation not as the teacher but as the learner kind of thing, and so we had a great mutual exchange. But some of the things that I learned was I loved some of the language that they put around it. So they talk about it as deployment.
That's cool.
Okay, and so it's kind of a military term. So do what you want with that. But their whole thing is, he said, we've tried to create this thing where the church is a battleship, and so there's some good side metaphors that go with that. So one of the ones they use, it's not a cruise ship, it's a battleship. So that's a good,
that's a good visual.
Yeah. But one of the things he said that really caught my attention, he said, battles don't take place on the ship, but away from the ship. And so it's like you are deploying people to go into battle, and the ship is kind of the safe space that you return to refuel,
That's good.
to find strength in numbers, to get your marching orders, to eat, to sleep, all of that. But then you go back.
You leave again.
You go back out into the battle. So I just thought there was some
That's cool.
Some great stuff. And here's the other thing. He had this little fascinating learning that he had done about asking better questions. And I'm going to just completely rip it off and steal it for us, because I think, he basically said the answers you arrive at will depend on the questions that you ask. And the most important way, the most important way to get to the right answers is to ask better and better questions. And because the questions you ask set a trajectory that force you into an answer field that are only attached to that question. So, right? So he says, if the question you're asking is, how do we grow our church?
Yeah.
You're going to arrive at some answers to that questions, but they may be answers to the wrong question.
Right. That's great.
And so he said the questions they started asking around their deployed people: what do they need? When do they need it? And how do we get it to them?
Wow.
And he said, when we fixated on those questions, it changed the whole way that we did ministry.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
So anyway.
Wow, that's awesome.
The thing I will say that I think was helpful to him back from me was because the original question was about structure.
Yeah.
And he said, right now it's like he's kind of going up to people going, hey, they had a name for their people who are deployed, but he's like, hey, you're one of our these things, and the people don't even know it. And he's like, no, your name is right here in my journal, and I've been praying for you every morning. They're like, what? So it's very, very informal, like to the point where people don't even know, they're not even opting in, or there's no kind of any kind of formal process around it. And so he was super intrigued by our handcrafted structure. And I'll just say on this podcast, I don't know if I've said it before, but some of the categories that we put around people's calling, that we're trying to, these questions that he asked are very forefront in our mind of like, what do they need? When do they need it? How do we get it to them? The categories that we've put around people living out their calling are, some people do it in their neighborhood. So if you think of it as a pastor of their parish, what is the parish of the? So for some people, their parish is their neighborhood. For some people, their parish is their workplace or the marketplace. Like Tracy, we're going to interview today. Her parish is a nonprofit that kind of flows out of her life story. For some, it's an affinity group. So the people you work out with, or the people you play pickleball with, or whatever it is. And for some, that their parish is in the church. So they're coming back. So those 5 categories of calling, I think even just me saying those out loud were super helpful for him to go, oh, that's going to help us ask better questions around those categories and how to just bring some formal structure to what they're doing.
Wow, cool.
So I thought everybody would appreciate it. It was really kind of right in the pocket of the kind of things that we're talking about here.
For real.
And I think, again, I love the conversation. If there are any other pastors out there that want to talk or who are doing stuff that they think would be helpful, like I just think it was so super helpful, not just to us, but hopefully to everybody who's listening.
That's awesome. Cool. As we tweak our assimilation model to have more of a disciple-making focus and invent a multiplication funnel to awake the lake and reach our region, we're learning as we go. So each week we want to have a topic to discuss in front of you and a practical moment of learning that week. And today's topic is how to be a compassionate storyteller. So today we have with us Pastor Sarah and Tracy.
Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hey, everybody.
If you've listened before, you've heard Pastor Sarah on this podcast. Tracy grew up and currently resides in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. She graduated the University of Tampa. That's a long way from Edinburgh.
It was lovely.
Dang.
Yeah, with a degree in accounting. You've been married for 18 years. Your husband, you have 4 amazing kids. You're co-founder of Emma's Footprints, and that's a really cool organization that walks along thousands of families all over the place that have experienced pregnancy or infant loss, just birthed out of your own story. You're also a doula, which I did not know that.
Yes.
Wow.
That's so cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So glad you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this, we're going through kind of the series of Dream Disciple roles. So we have 4 roles that we've determined are the roles that we would love for our people at Grace to try to live into as they pursue their discipleship of Jesus. And we kind of put a name to those. And one of those roles is a compassionate storyteller. And so I just want to read you kind of the description of this. It's I know God's story, my place in it, and I'm motivated to tell the people in my life. Again, we would love for our people to be living into that role. And so I want to throw it to Danielle and Sarah, because you were both in the room as we were creating all of these things. Let's talk about just how this role, compassionate storyteller, made its way into our list of 4 main discipleship roles that we would like our people to embody. Anybody have a take on that?
Well, we were trying to unpack what the local predicament was for our region, and just understanding that there was like a lot of broken story, broken narrative.
Yeah.
And so we landed on like, what is kind of our call as a church in this region, came up with these 2 words of redeeming narratives. And so from there, it's like, well, what does a dream disciple in our region, what is God calling us to be? And if we're redeeming narratives, then we need to be a people who know what the true narrative is, God's story. But then we also need to be able to speak to, well, how does mine fit into that? Like, what is God doing in my story that's part of his story? So I'm sorry if I said too much.
I was just saying, and alongside that, I think the other side of the local predicament was that red letter study that we did, where we looked at like what were the things that really made Jesus kind of stand out. And even some of the disciples I think we looked at too, and that was a big thing, obviously, was like how he weaved just storytelling into everything that he did. And so it was, for me, that was, I think, out of the 4, the most obvious one that we landed on.
Yeah. And in traditional terms, I mean, this is an evangelism,
right?
This is an evangelism role, but we're talking about it through a storytelling lens, because we're saying, this is evangelism often only dials in on a small portion of the story of God, that is our sin and Jesus' salvation, which is obviously the cornerstone, the key, but there's more to the story than that. God created us, and so there's this identity and purpose that's all kind of intermingled in the story of God. And so we're saying we want to do a better job of training our people to know that bigger story, and then, like you said, to figure out how does my life intersect with that story in a way that I'm bringing purpose to the world. I'm experiencing purpose in my own life. I've attached my identity to something bigger than myself, not something I'm concocting within myself. And so anyway, I think it's a really key role for our people to understand and live out. And Tracy's here to talk a little bit about how you're living that out. And so we really want to zone in on like, what are some key skills that we can develop to be better compassionate storytellers? And I think we'll learn from Tracy's story a little bit. So,
I hope so.
Yeah, that'll be good. So I'll throw it over to you, Sarah. You kind of man the interview, and we'll chime in when we have a thought.
Yeah, sure. I would just love for you, Danielle, introduce you saying that you're the founder of Emma's Footprints, but talk about the origin story of Emma's Footprints, because it's your story. And I think that it's a key to laying the context for everything else we're going to talk about.
So I know this is a short podcast. I could
that's
talk
right.
about it, for an hour about Emma, who Emma is. But she is my little girl, and she was born on May 30th, 2007, and she was stillborn. So she was the second of my 4 amazing children. I have 3 boys at home. And so her story starts then. But the organization starts, we got our 501c3 status on May 30th of 2014. So the organization and Emma have different birthdays.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So what was it that took you from that obviously quite painful place in your own story to 7? Am I doing the math right?
Yes,
7 years
her 7th
later,
birthday.
On her 7th birthday, launching this organization.
I love telling my story because it's kind of just like what not to do. So like, don't be like Tracy. That's kind of a hashtag we have at Emma's Footprints. After I delivered Emma and left the hospital without my daughter, never once was there anything in me, hey, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to help people one day. It was just, honestly, it was just dark. I can't remember a lot for those 5 to 6 years after she was born. So it's, if I can do this, you all can do this kind of thing, because that's who God is. He just tugged on my heart. He gave me this opportunity. We started a team for the local March of Dimes chapter, named it, we tried to name it Emma's Angels, but somebody took that. I was like, well, that was such a silly name. Why did we want that name? So landed on Emma's Footprints. We raised money for them. And I was so happy because I got to talk about Emma. And that was what I needed. That's what we need as lost parents, is to talk about our children. And that gave me the opportunity. So I said, I got 3 boys at home. I get to talk about Emma. I'm good. And God was like, nah, you're not. And he just pressed on my heart. Just a really, it's hard to describe that feeling, but I told him no a lot. I said, no, do you see I'm busy? Do you see I don't know what I'm doing? Do you see you chose the wrong person? And he just wouldn't relent. And so I said, fine, I will do this, but when this fails, I'll say I told you so, and I'll go on with my life. And here we are almost 11 years later.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
That's amazing.
I don't want to cut you guys off.
No, go ahead. No,
okay. So talk to me then about, in that course of that 7 years, and then you made the decision to pause and listen to God in that moment, but what was it about the pain and the struggle and the years of your story that was drawing you into the story that God was writing for you?
So, I think when I became a member of this church, one of the questions is like, what is your story? Or, what's your testimony? And I couldn't answer that question. To me, it felt like a bunch of chapters in a book that didn't make sense. It was very disjointed. God, why did you make this phenomenal athlete growing up and I never did anything with it? Why? Why? And again, at no point was I like, okay, God, this is just my story and you're going to weave it together. I was, but at some point it kind of hit me. It's like, oh my gosh, this is, my story is your story. I forgot the question.
No, that's okay. Exactly. Like how were you learning to see your story in God's story?
Yeah. It didn't happen real time. It happened afterwards. And I was building this organization that I desperately needed. That was not available when I was going through my dark time. So it was this really weird place to be in where I still didn't really have the support I needed. But yet I'm building this nonprofit out of nothing that doesn't exist for these families that have stories like mine, and also learning who God is in that. I cried many days on my kitchen floor, just weeping, like I can't do this. And as I then would read the Bible and realize, okay, like, so when you say you're my refuge, oh, that's what that means. Like when you say you're my portion, oh, that's what that means. So I was discovering with my story that felt disjointed. I was discovering God's story and then how he was using me and my story in his story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the God story, there's like the 5 portions of creation and fall and redemption, which of course is the cross. And then there's the mission, which what we're living in now, and you are clearly doing through Emma's Footprints.
Yeah.
And then there's the restoration point, which we're all waiting for. So you know Jesus, and you have the hope of this like restoration, a future with Emma, for eternity.
Right.
Are all the families you serve, do they all know God's story? Do they all understand that level of hope, or how are you bringing God's hope to their stories?
I don't think that they do. Well, I know that they don't, but I have been deployed in the most intense, vulnerable situations with these families. I go into the hospital when a baby dies. I get a call from the local hospitals, and God just deploys me in there. I mentioned I'm an athlete growing up, so it's like he gives me these layups. People look at me when I come to their bedside, and it's the coolest thing to say, I'm Emma's mom. And they're like, you're Emma's mom? Oh, wow. Because they know her name. She's like Taylor Swift, it feels like. Yeah. And they look at me, and I'm smiling, and I feel like I have a twinkle in my eye. And they're like, how are you doing this? Mm-hmm. How did you get there? And so, I try to use discernment, because not every moment is an appropriate moment for that. But just showing up in that situation, in that moment, I'm like, that's what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. And he just sat with them, and just building that relationship with them, to then as they, because we walk the journey with these lost families. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he just gives me these layups where people just, how do you do this? Mm-hmm. How are you there? How are you on the other side? Mm-hmm. And I get to, tell them what God has done for me.
Yeah. I think about that passage that says, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. And again, the things that I've always thought about that is that verse is assuming that people are going to be asking you that question. Right.
Exactly.
So, what you're calling a layup is really something that's promised to all of us in Scripture if we are living out a faithful witness to the gospel, which is really cool to hear you talk about that. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah.
Do you have like a specific story? I know that you and I have regular conversations, so I get to hear some of your stories, but are there any specific stories, from the last several months or something that stand out to you as like, you see how God's story is intersecting with somebody else's painful story?
Yeah, I have many, but one that comes to my mind, I got called in a couple months ago for a loss, a 40-week loss. This family was from Africa, and so I was told on the phone they speak no English. Oh, wow. Oh, okay, this is new for me, but let's go. I do this. The mom had to have a C-section. She was recovering in PACU, and my first time, we had to use a translator service. So we had to call whatever the hospital, whatever service they use, and you get a translator. It's hard enough going in and talking about your baby just died, and hi, my name is Tracy, and here's what this looks like, let alone not doing it in English. Mm-hmm. They're just total barriers. Yeah. And the woman got on the phone, and so the nurse is trying to medically take care of the mom. So she's talking to the translator, and then I'm talking to the translator, introducing myself. And the translator's name was Lucy. And so we did that. We explained, and poor Lucy, she picks up the phone. She's at work one day. Yeah. Here's Lucy. Yeah. Immediately inserted into this situation. So she has to translate. It felt like when I was in Haiti telling my story, and Eric almost fell over, who was translating.
She's not brokering a bank transaction. She was a very, very sensitive moment.
Yes. And the eyes that like, wait, what?
Yeah, right. The eyes. Yeah, and it's on delay. It's on delay for you, so you're waiting for the
that was a fun experience. But sweet Lucy. So she's explaining to hers. And then, so she was in PACU, and then we had to get her to her recovery room where her family was waiting and the baby was waiting. And so we hang up with Lucy. We do that. We go in the room. The nurse is kind of getting her situated, the mom, and the family's in there, and the baby's in the little isolate. And the nurse leaves me alone in the room. Like, yep, it's just me and the family. The 6 people in this family, no English. I'm like, I need Lucy here. So I asked the nurse for her charge phone. I called the service back. What I didn't realize was that, so we got Lucy again. Oh, nice. Because of Jesus. So Lucy told me later, this never happens. Oh, wow. When I hang up with a family, I never get them again.
Oh my gosh.
And but I took that for granted. I was like, oh, Lucy's just waiting for us. She's just chilling, waiting for us. Untrue. So I'm trying to, all these things are rushing through my head. I've been in that room 306, many times for that same purpose, but it was totally different to where, hey, culturally, Tracy, you got to be sensitive to this. Some cultures don't see this as a baby. I mean, all of these things I've learned. And I remember I put my hand on the little baby's his chest, and the mom like turned away from me. I was like, okay, God, I don't know what to do here. I got nothing. And it's like, okay, I felt just like, go with what you know. And so I I got Lucy, and so I'm talking to a phone, looking at their baby, and I just do what I do, and I comment, look at his little nose, and all the training that I've learned. And so then I'm talking to the parents of navigating, hey, we have to think about burial or cremation. I asked, they've been in Erie for a year and a half from Africa. So nope, they don't know anybody, have they ever been through this? So I was trying to help them walk them through this, and they hadn't named their baby at that point. But then the dad says, we just named him. So they're talking
It's
amongst
happening,
themselves, in their language, as I'm like sitting waiting. I'm like, what'd you say? And so the dad says, we just named him Isaac, like in the Bible.
Okay.
I was like, excuse me? And like in the Bible? Okay. So I just like tucked that away, and I just kept doing my thing. And then there was this other guy in the room, and he said to the translator that they love Jesus. And so I was like, okay, God, you've asked me to be here in this really, amazing, intense, horrific moment with this family that love you, that are saying your name, that they love Jesus. And so but it felt like we spoke the same language. So that I kicked into, I was like, okay, so this is going to sound really weird, but I would love for you to sing Isaac a song, and I'm going to video it. So they sang him these two beautiful Swahili lullabies, and I just cried my face off the whole time. The nurse is in the corner crying. Lucy's on the phone crying because she's translating. Finds out Lucy loves Jesus. This family from Africa loves Jesus. And here we are with their, sweet little Isaac, who we're saying hello and goodbye to on the same amount of, I got there at 10 p.m. I think I left at 2 a.m. And then I asked if I could play a worship song. So I played The Story I'll Tell by Maverick City Music and Naomi Raines. And so that, I got to experience their culture, and what one of the two songs they sang, it was a worship song. I recognized the tune, and I can't remember which one it was, but so we got to share those moments, and it's like, God, you're just this big God. All of those things that came together. You said in a sermon, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, these divine appointments. You used that phrase, and I feel like I have a lot of divine appointments on my calendar, throughout the week, and that's that family I will never forget. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, speak to them. I can't provide them our other emotional support resources. Today we can't. But I hope the impact that I made in walking that room, and they had said to me, like, we could tell something was different about you. Like you have this light, and so
that's great.
So my I don't know if they knew this. My son's middle name is Isaac, and so that they didn't know that. But I don't know if they knew. I don't know if they knew what that name means. But the name means laughter, and which is wild to think about what they were in, and to name him that.
Wow.
Again, whether they were aware of it or not,
right.
they spoke a message of hope in that moment, which is really profound too.
So in the middle of all of my doubts, I'm like, God, I can't do this. This is, for all of that to happen, to have Lucy on the phone, to her. And then I said, Lucy, I need your interpreter number in case I need you again. So she gave me that. I was like, where are you? She's like, I'm in Texas.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So you're in Texas and I'm in Erie, and this family's from Africa. And here we are. Our stories unite. Yeah.
And such a cool thing to know that your story that began in 2007, which was your own personal journey, intersects with them in 2025 or 24, whenever it was. And it's another chapter in the story God is writing in both of your lives, but also in a bigger context that we don't even know.
Right.
In advancing His mission forward in this time, which is really, it's really profound how God does that.
Yeah. And then I got to share with all of the nurses. They look at me like, "How did you do that?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Teach us." So I'm like, "Oh, well, okay. God, help." Just tell me what to do next.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I really feel like, Tracy, we could, the other dream disciple roles are savvy follower, an embedded influencer, an intentional friend. And I'm like, which one of these is Tracy not walking in?
Right.
But to me, like you said, Derek, like over the last 17 years, the number of times your story has intersected with another family's story of pain and heartache, and you've shown them how God can redeem the narrative through his own story is just, you are a light, and you are bringing laughter to people who never thought that they could, laugh again. So it's
and I
incredible.
get to say, God is who he says he is, and he does what he says he's going to do.
Yeah.
I was unwell. I was in the grave.
I'm also thinking about, just some principles we've talked about around this role before with like, so, and it's not just you, your story is very unique, but everybody has a gospel story to tell. And that's something that we, you mentioned it when you first came to the church here, of going like, if we said that, or we, put that in the atmosphere, you were like, I don't know what mine is. And so, I think one of the basic foundational skills is just for everybody to realize every single person has a gospel story. Yes. Every Christian anyway. The second thing we often talk about is hard for people to argue with your story. So they can argue with your theology, they can argue with your politics, they can argue with your interpretation of the Bible. But when a human being goes, here's what Jesus has done in my life, you can't argue with that.
Right.
And so you're living that out. And then I think about too, people who know you will trust your story. So people within your sphere of influence, and you had a sphere of influence with this family, but you also had a sphere of influence with the nurses. And so there's a trust component there that comes when you're telling your story and living out your story. That doesn't come if you would have walked into that nurse's station and go, I'm going to give you the 4 spiritual laws.
Right.
Sit down, raise your hand if you want to follow. There's something about a story and somebody kind of fully living it out that builds trust and not doubt. And I think what you're saying just kind of is underlining some of those key principles, I think, that go around this idea of being a compassionate storyteller. So. Can I go back to the very beginning in 2007? I'm sorry if I'm going to steal a question.
It's fine.
I do it all the time. Back to the very beginning, as this was in your origin story, and please, you can be totally honest and transparent, okay? How could the church have done a better job coming around you as you were thinking about developing this calling, this ministry? Where are some other places that the church could have intersected with you, encouraged you, given you resources, whatever, provided just emotional support? How can the church do a better job with people who are at that bridge moment of living out their calling or taking a step in their discipleship journey? This podcast is for pastors and church leaders. And so, I really want to bridge that gap and go for pastors when they hear someone like you, because everybody has people like you in their churches.
Right.
It's like, how can we do a better job equipping you, resourcing you, that sort of thing? So do you have any reflections on that?
I think that what you did last year with the pilot program, that's what I needed in the beginning.
Yeah.
I felt, I doubted myself the whole time. Why, God, why me? I don't know what I'm doing. And so it was just a lot of wrestling by myself. And good thing God made me gritty, because I wasn't going to quit, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Because it's hard, whether it's creating that space for people that, if somebody comes to you and says, God is pressing on my heart to do something, you better listen.
Yeah.
Right, if they come to you and say, like, I have a lot of families after the loss we serve, like, I'm going to do something one day. I'm like, okay, well, you might, but also you need a minute to heal. Yeah. But if somebody comes to you and says, God just keeps talking to me, and so giving them a place to go. And that pilot program last year was great for me, because I don't work at a church. So it felt like, does anybody see me? Is what I'm doing important? Right. We all serve the same God, but like, I know we're on the same team, but like, are we? Or like, help here. Just, I need help and guidance or encouragement, a mentor, something, anything. Because I know that that's what God chose me to do. So I wasn't like looking at the church. Hey guys, where are you to help me? I'm like, I knew it was me.
Yeah.
But to have, just even looking at me and saying, I see you.
Yeah.
Your work is important and keep going.
I think just to put language to it for those that are listening, what Tracy's referring to is our leadership intensive. So you were part of a small group of leaders, kind of marketplace leaders, nonprofit leaders that just went through kind of a 2.5 month kind of intensive discipleship process where we just literally, what's the Holy Spirit saying to you?
Up.
What are you going to do about it? And held each other accountable to that. And it was, there was a lot of cool stuff that emerged out of that. So,
So you guys are doing it now? So thanks.
Yeah. We finally caught up 17 years later.
God's timing. I'm gritty. I made it through.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Okay, so that was amazing.
Yeah, we were both fighting back tears.
I know. I was like useless during that segment. I was like, don't move. Do not breathe. Nobody look at me. I was just like tears.
Hopefully Sarah's heard this before and can say words.
And then, when we stopped with them, Sarah was like, I've never heard that story before. I was like, well, I mean, that was, obviously she's an incredible person, but just Tracy, like, I think, just as someone who's gone through similar things and just different things in life, and anybody, but like, she is just such a testament to, I think it's just like this thing where you do have to wait for perspective. Like sometimes when people just go into like activation mode, 10 years later, they're just like a mess. They've never dealt with it. There's we've seen all the things that happen to people.
It becomes a coping mechanism, not a ministry.
Exactly. And then you're just out of nothing. But it was inspiring to me to see that. And I feel like she has a lot, not only to give in that realm, but just to other people who are like starting things up and living this life out. And she's just wise beyond her years.
Yep. So cool.
Okay. So we're going to talk about what happened this week.
Yeah.
And it includes math.
Yeah.
Not
all
really.
right.
Not really.
Yeah.
Just theory. Math theory.
Math theory. Wow. That's even worse. That's worse.
I did not go far with math. I did all the algebras, and I think that was it.
Listen, my son Caleb is just like a wizard. And
Caleb, we know you're listening.
So,
Turn this off. Just kidding.
So he hit about 3rd grade, and we were through.
Yeah, done helping.
Can't help you.
All right, so we're talking addition versus multiplication.
Yeah.
What happened?
So this flowed out of a conversation that I had a week or so ago. We were wrestling with, as people that listen know, we were wrestling with how to measure things, what to measure, what makes sense to measure. And I was wrestling through one of the kind of the big markers that we had put out there for 3 years from now. Has to do with getting a certain percentage of people that understand their calling actually in our whole county. So it's not beyond our church, it's in our whole county. To how do we help more and more people understand their calling. I started to question the measure because it felt like that measure, that big number goal, was pressing us back to doing things in a megachurch way.
Yes, 100% agree.
Right?
Yes.
So it was like, how many people can we pump through? How many people can we get in these rooms and in these classes and get through, pump it, And so I'm having this, and again, part of it's just
muscles.
This is muscle. This is the way I think.
I remember I was at my desk and I was like, what? I was looking at Teams message from you and I was like, this is never going to happen.
Right, exactly.
Because I'm adding.
Right, exactly. So it's addition versus multiplication. So that's an adding model. How do we add more and more people to the roles? How do we add more and more people to these classes so that we can hit this number in 3 years? So one talk with Dave Rhodes, which we're going to have Dave and Shane on the podcast here in a few weeks. But
actually, that could be a podcast title, One Talk with Dave Rhodes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
It's like,
I'm sure.
So
5 seconds.
He goes, I'm explaining this to him, and he goes, "You're thinking about it wrong." I'm like, okay. He said, "You're thinking about how many people you're going to get into class." He goes, "Multiplication thinking is how many trainers can we train to lead people through this experience."
Yeah.
And so your focus is on the participants. How many can we get? When your focus needs to be on the trainers.
Yeah.
How many can we train up?
Yeah.
And he goes, once you train up the right number, the numbers will take care of themselves. Like you're not even striving for the numbers anymore because you're just multiplying that locus of of knowledge and training that you have, and then the trainers do the thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like the reason I bring it up now, and we've been talking about it, is because I feel like that is one of 10,000 times we're going to have to remind ourselves of that, because I think that we have been trained in a addition model. And the thinking for an addition model is totally different than thinking for a multiplication model.
Yeah. And I think back to, and I know this is on the assimilation side of things, but as Sarah was developing some of the parts of launch, and we were talking to them, Diane, who's leading, that accidentally, I know it wasn't, I kind of accidentally took the flair of like, oh, well, let's start it with staff just so we know they can vet the curriculum, blah, blah, blah. What we accidentally did was then, so like I was one of the teachers, I was one of the leaders. I had 2 people with me walk through it. Now they're each right now leading. And so that's for the launch class. And so I can see already, I mean, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people through the launch class without having to have classes of 100 people in them. And so for me, even knowing that and recently had been through that, I still didn't go back to it.
It still wasn't an instinct.
When you were like, hey, we got to get blah, blah. I was like, class of 500. What? So what it does though too is I think it gives us an extra step in the process when we're developing curriculum to say, okay, what's the curriculum for training the trainers? Just as important as the curriculum for, the people.
Yeah. And this is a Pandora's box, but I'll just mention it because I think then maybe we can talk about it a different time.
That's fine.
Then it determines what kind of curriculum you can create.
Yes. And we found that in launch.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if it's overly teachy,
right.
Then you have to have skilled teachers, and there's not a ton of skilled teachers.
Yeah, right.
But if it's more of a training, if it's more relational, interactive, coachy, right, consulty, way more people can facilitate something like that. And there's this age-old debate in that's how you lose theological standing.
Sure.
So there are risks with that model. So I think part of it is threading that needle and knowing how to implement some of these things. And maybe there are some certain things that require more doctrine, theology, expertise than others. Yeah. And we have to just put them in the right category.
Right. That makes total sense.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. If you like this episode, you can tell us by leaving a rating or review. 5 stars, obviously, if you did. For those of you who don't know how the star system works. You don't want to miss what's next. Like Derek said, we have Dave and Shane coming at some point. So subscribe so you don't miss those. And as always, you can go to dereksanford.com/Reinventing Church. You can subscribe to his newsletter there, get a bunch of free tools and tips and tricks, and just generally keep up with him. All right. Thanks. Have a good week. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.